HOA said my gate was illegal. I built a bigger one. I thought it was just a normal morning, until I opened that letter. The words on that page changed everything. They told me I had no choice. They told me I had to take it down. My own gate, on my own property, they called it illegal. But I wasn't about to bow down, not this time. Because what I did next shocked the entire neighborhood. And when the HOA came back to face me, they never expected what they saw. Stay with me, because what happened at that gate will leave you stunned. Welcome, my friends, to HOA Max Stories, where real-life battles with homeowners associations come alive. My name is John. I live in a quiet neighborhood here in the US, and like many of you, I worked hard for my home, but sometimes, the HOA makes it feel like it's not really mine at all. Before we jump into the full story, let me ask you something. Have you subscribed yet? Go ahead and press that button, not for me, but for yourself, so you never miss these true stories. And while you're at it, tell me in the comments, where are you watching from tonight? I'd love to know if you're listening from Texas, Florida, maybe California, or somewhere far away. I told you, the HOA said my gate was illegal, and I was not ready to bow down. That letter kept flashing in my mind. Even when I tried to sleep, I could see those words, remove immediately or face daily fines. It felt less like a notice, and more like a threat. I knew this was going to turn into a fight I didn't ask for, but one I could not run away from. You see, my gate wasn't just wood and metal, it was my pride, my comfort, my line of defense. I worked hard, year after year, saving money, planning, making sure my home looked the way I dreamed it would. And that gate was the finishing touch. It gave me peace of mind when my grandkids played in the yard, it gave me privacy when I wanted to sit outside with a cup of coffee, it gave me a sense that this was truly my castle. And now, they wanted me to take it down? I remember the first time I saw the two HOA officers walk up my driveway. Their shiny badges, their stiff shirts, and that same cold look in their eyes, like they were in charge of me, like I was just a tenant in my own home. They didn't even greet me kindly. The first words were, "Sir, this gate violates community standards. You'll need to remove it." Community standards? I laughed inside, because I knew every corner of this neighborhood. Some houses were falling apart, some yards looked like jungles, but my gate was the problem? No, this wasn't about rules, this was about control. I stood there, staring at them, their hands resting on their belts, like they were ready for a standoff. I could feel the heat rising in my chest, that mix of anger and fear. But fear quickly faded. I told them, "No. I will not take down my gate." The taller officer smirked, like he had heard this before. He pulled out his clipboard and said, "Every day this gate remains, you will be fined. Every single day until you comply." Then they turned and walked away, as if the decision was already made, as if I had no choice. But I did have a choice, and my choice was simple. I was not going to give in. That night, I sat on my porch staring at the gate. The lantern light flickered, shadows danced across the iron bars, and I thought about everything that led me here. My father used to tell me, "Son, if you don't stand for something, you'll fall for anything." Those words came back to me, stronger than ever. I wasn't just fighting for a gate. I was fighting for my right to call this home mine. Over the next few days, the letters piled up. Each one colder than the last. Violation notice. Final warning. Pending legal action. They wanted to scare me, and maybe it would have worked on someone else, but not me. Every letter made me more determined, every fine notice felt like fuel to my fire. And here's the thing. I started to notice neighbors whispering. Some looked at me with sympathy, others with judgment, but a few gave me a nod, like they wished they had the courage to do the same. I realized then, this fight wasn't just mine. It was for every homeowner who had been pushed around, bullied, and silenced by their HOA. I wasn't going to be another victim. I was going to be an example. So I started planning. If they hated my gate so much, then maybe I needed to give them something even bigger, even stronger, something they couldn't ignore. The idea made me smile, a bigger gate, a gate that would make the old one look like a toy. For nights, I sketched designs on paper, erasing and redrawing, imagining every detail. I pictured the looks on their faces, the shock, the frustration, the disbelief when they saw it standing there, twice the size, twice the strength. But here's the twist. I wasn't going to do it recklessly. I was going to make sure every inch of it was legal. Every bolt, every hinge, every piece of iron, exactly by the book. I would follow the same rules they tried to use against me, and I would beat them at their own game. The more I planned, the more excited I became. I could almost hear the clanging of the iron as I built it. I could almost see the sunlight bouncing off the tall, proud frame. I imagined driving through it, not just into my driveway, but into victory. Still, I knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy. The HOA doesn't like being challenged, and I had a feeling they weren't going to back down quietly. But neither was I. And as I sat there one night, staring at the half-moon rising above my street, I asked myself a question, one that still lingers today. When the people in power push too far, do you bow down to them, or do you stand up and fight? So tell me, if your HOA came after something you worked hard for, something you loved, would you give in, or would you fight back? I couldn't stop thinking about what they had said. Illegal, remove immediately. Those words burned into my mind like a fire. Every time I looked at that letter, I felt the same anger rising in me. But anger wasn't enough. I needed a plan. I needed to be smarter than them. I started by walking around my neighborhood. I looked at every fence, every mailbox, every little thing people had built. And do you know what I found? Rules being broken everywhere. Some fences taller than regulation, some sheds built without approval, even cars parked where they weren't supposed to be. But no one said a word to them. Why? Because they weren't me. It became clear, this wasn't about a gate. This was about control. They picked me, maybe because my gate stood out, maybe because it made my house look stronger, prouder, or maybe just because I wasn't the type to bow my head. That realization lit a fire in me. I went home that night and sat at my old wooden desk. I pulled out a fresh notepad and started drawing. My hands moved fast, almost as if they already knew what I wanted to build. Lines turned into shapes, shapes turned into a design, and before I knew it, I was staring at the sketch of a new gate. Bigger, stronger, more powerful. I could already imagine it standing tall in front of my driveway. Not just a gate, but a statement. But I also knew, if I was going to do this, it had to be perfect. No mistakes. No loopholes for them to exploit. So I spent days studying the HOA's own rulebook. Page after page, line after line. I read every word. And the more I read, the more I realized they were sloppy. Their rules had cracks, gaps, things they hadn't covered. And in those cracks, I found my freedom. According to their own rules, I could build a new gate if it met certain requirements: height, materials, distance from the sidewalk. My old gate was slightly off, but my new design? It would fit perfectly inside their own standards. That gave me power. The next step was gathering what I needed. I went to the hardware store, loaded my truck with wood, iron, bolts, paint, everything. The cashier looked at me funny and said, "Building something big?" I smiled and said, "Bigger than you think." At night, I worked in silence. The sound of my hammer echoed through the still air, the spark of welding lit up the darkness, and piece by piece, my vision started to take shape. It wasn't easy. My hands ached, my back hurt, but every strike of the hammer made me feel alive. Like I was taking back control of my home. Sometimes, I'd pause and look at the half-finished frame, sweat dripping from my forehead, and I'd whisper to myself, "This is for every homeowner they've ever pushed around." Word started spreading in the neighborhood. People slowed down when they walked by my house. Some smiled and gave me a thumbs up. Others shook their heads, whispering like I was making a big mistake. But deep inside, I knew. I wasn't just building a gate. I was building a story, one they would never forget. Then came the day of the inspection. I was in my yard, tightening the last bolt, when I saw them walking up the street. 2 HOA officers, the same ones as before. clipboards in hand, stern looks on their faces. But this time, I was ready. They stopped at the edge of my driveway, staring at the massive new gate. It was twice as tall as the old one, thick iron bars shining in the sunlight, fresh paint gleaming like armor. It looked unmovable. One of them muttered, This isn't what we told you to do." I calmly wiped the sweat from my hands, walked over, and handed them the paperwork. "Every measurement," I said, "is within your own rules. Height, width, material, everything. Legal. You wanted me to remove my old gate? Fine. I did. But I built this one, and there's nothing you can do about it." Their faces told the whole story. Shock, anger, defeat. I watched as they flipped through the papers, searching desperately for something, anything, that could prove me wrong. But there was nothing. Their own rulebook had betrayed them. They left without a word. I stood there, leaning against the new gate, and I felt a sense of victory I hadn't felt in years. This wasn't just about iron and bolts, it was about standing up for myself. About proving that even ordinary people like me can fight back against power. That night, as the sun went down, I sat on my porch and just looked at it. My new gate stood tall, proud, unshakable. And for the first time in weeks, I felt peace. But peace didn't last long. Because I knew the HOA wouldn't let this go. They never do. They'd come back with something new, another excuse, another attack. And I couldn't help but wonder. How far would they be willing to go, and how far would I have to go to stop them? So tell me, friends, if you were in my shoes, and your HOA came back, angrier than ever, would you keep fighting, or would you finally give in? They left that day without a word, but silence is not always peace. Silence can be the sound of something darker, something waiting to strike. And deep inside, I knew the HOA was not done with me. For a few days, I enjoyed the calm. Neighbors passing by would stop to look at the new gate. Some whispered, some smiled. A few even knocked on my door to say, "Good job," someone had to stand up to them. Those small words, they gave me strength. I realized I wasn't alone. People were tired of being pushed around. But just when I thought maybe, just maybe, the storm had passed, another letter arrived. This one was thicker, heavier. It wasn't just a violation notice, it was a formal summons. They wanted to take me to court. My hands trembled as I read it. Court? Over a gate? It felt unreal. They were escalating, they wanted to make an example out of me. They wanted to scare every other homeowner by showing what happens when you don't obey. That night, I sat at my kitchen table, staring at the papers. My wife asked me, "Is it worth it? All this stress, all this fighting?" I looked at her, then at the gate outside the window, and I said, "Yes. It is worth it. Because if I give in now, they'll never stop. Not with me. Not with anyone." So I prepared. I gathered every document, every receipt, every picture of the gate from the day I built it. I even hired a lawyer, not because I couldn't defend myself, but because I wanted to hit them with everything I had. If they wanted war, they were going to get it. The first hearing was something I'll never forget. I walked into that cold courtroom, my heart pounding, and saw them sitting across from me. The HOA board members, dressed sharp, looking smug, as if victory was already theirs. They didn't even glance my way. To them, I was just another troublemaker to crush. But when the judge asked for my side, I stood tall. I explained how I had followed every rule, how I had corrected every mistake, how my new gate was perfectly legal. I handed over the paperwork, line by line, showing that I had played by their own book. The judge flipped through the pages, nodded, and then turned to the HOA's lawyer. "Do you have evidence that this gate violates the rules?" The lawyer stammered, shuffled papers, tried to twist words. But the truth was clear, they had nothing. The judge dismissed the case. I won. For a moment, it felt like the final victory. Like the war was over. I walked out of that courtroom with my head high, neighbors congratulated me. I even saw one board member storm out, red-faced and furious. But victory has a price. Because after that day, the HOA changed their tactics. They couldn't touch my gate anymore, so they started looking for other ways to make my life miserable. Suddenly, I was getting notices about my grass being too long, about my trash bins not being placed correctly, about small cracks in my driveway. Things they never cared about before, now they were all violations. It was harassment, plain and simple. They couldn't beat me in court, so they wanted to wear me down slowly, inch by inch, until I broke. And for a while, I'll admit, it worked. The constant letters, the constant stress, it started eating away at me. I'd hear the mailman's truck and feel my stomach tighten. What now? What did they find today? But then, something happened that changed everything. One evening, as I was pulling weeds in the yard, an older neighbor walked up. He looked around nervously and then whispered, "I'm proud of what you did. You stood up to them. You don't know how many of us are watching." I stared at him, surprised. He leaned closer and said, "They've pushed all of us for years. But you fought back. Don't stop now." Those words hit me hard. I realized, this wasn't just about me anymore. This was bigger. I had become a symbol, whether I wanted it or not. And so, I made a choice. I wasn't just going to defend myself anymore. I was going to expose them. I started documenting everything. Every letter, every notice, every picture of the so-called violations. I built a file so thick, it looked like a novel. And then, I started sharing my story. I talked to neighbors, I showed them the truth. And slowly, something started to change. People began to stand with me. I wasn't just fighting for my gate anymore. I was fighting for my community. The HOA didn't see it yet, but their biggest mistake wasn't going after my gate. Their biggest mistake was underestimating me. And as I stood in front of that gate one evening, watching the sun set behind it, I thought to myself, if they've already lost in court, and now the neighbors are waking up, what will they try next, when they realize their power is slipping away? So let me ask you, if your HOA kept targeting you, day after day, for every little thing, would you stay silent, or would you rise up and lead the fight? They thought they could wear me down, but they didn't understand something about me. The more they pushed, the stronger I became. The more they tried to break me, the more determined I felt to stand tall. One morning, I woke up to find a bright orange notice taped right on my front door. In big bold letters it said, "Final warning. Continued non-compliance may result in property lien." A lien. They were threatening to take my home. For a moment, I just stood there, frozen, staring at that piece of paper. The home I worked my whole life for, the home where I raised my children, the place that held every memory, they wanted to use it as leverage to break me. I crumpled the notice in my fist. Something inside me snapped. I walked straight to my garage, opened the file cabinet, and pulled out the thick folder I had been building. Every notice, every letter, every fine, everything. I spread it all across the workbench, the papers covering every inch of the wood. Looking at it all together, it was clear as day, this wasn't about community rules. This was targeted harassment. That's when I decided, it was time to go on the offensive. I reached out to more of my neighbors. I knocked on doors, I made phone calls, I sat down at kitchen tables and listened. And what I heard broke my heart. One neighbor told me they had been fined hundreds of dollars for planting the wrong type of flowers. Another said they were threatened over the color of their shutters. An older couple whispered to me that they had stopped hosting family barbecues because the HOA complained about noise. The stories piled up, and I realized we had all been living under fear. Fear of letters, fear of fines, fear of losing our homes. But fear only works until someone says enough. I decided to be that someone. So I organized a small gathering at my house. At first, only a handful of neighbors showed up. We sat in folding chairs in my backyard, the new gate towering behind us like a shield. I told them everything, about the court case, about the harassment, about the threats. And then I asked a simple question, are you tired of being pushed around? The answer was written all over their faces. That night, something changed. People who had been silent for years finally started speaking. They weren't whispering anymore, they were sharing, venting, uniting. And in that moment, I knew we had power. The HOA wasn't expecting resistance. They were used to people caving under pressure. They were used to winning by fear. But now, the neighborhood was waking up. I began keeping records not just for myself, but for everyone. We created a group, neighbors checking in on each other, sharing every notice, every threat. And with every story, our case against the HOA grew stronger. But of course, the HOA noticed. They started sending more patrols through the neighborhood. They slowed down in front of my house, staring at the gate like it was a crime scene. Sometimes they would stop their car and just sit there, as if trying to intimidate me. But I didn't flinch. I would stand on my porch, arms crossed, and stare right back. One evening, as the sun was setting, I walked to the gate and placed my hand on the cold iron. I whispered to myself, "This is bigger than me now. This is about all of us." The next week, I received an invitation, if you could call it that, to attend the HOA board meeting. I knew what it meant. They wanted to confront me directly, in front of everyone. I showed up that night, walking into the small community hall where the meetings were held. The room was packed, board members at the front, neighbors in rows of chairs. The air felt heavy, charged with tension. The president of the HOA cleared his throat and said, "We're here to address ongoing issues with Mr." He said my name like it was poison. "This resident has repeatedly challenged community standards and undermined the authority of this board." Gasps filled the room. But before they could continue, I stood up. My voice was steady, louder than I expected. "No. What I have done is follow your rules. What I have done is protect my home. And what you have done is abuse your power." I opened the thick folder I carried under my arm and slammed it onto the table. Papers spilled across the surface, letters, fines, photos, all of it. "Here is the proof of your harassment. Not just against me, but against many of us here tonight." The room went silent. I could see neighbors shifting in their chairs, nodding, murmuring. Some of them looked braver just seeing the evidence laid out. The board members turned pale. They hadn't expected me to bring everything into the open. They wanted to shame me, but instead, the spotlight turned on them. That night, I walked out of the hall with my neighbors by my side. For the first time, the HOA looked weak. But I also knew, when people in power feel it slipping away, that's when they become the most dangerous. As I closed my gate behind me that night, I couldn't shake the question running through my mind. If the HOA had already tried letters, fines, and even court, what would they try next, when they realized they were losing control? And I ask you, if your community leaders turned against you, using every trick to break you, would you stay quiet, or would you stand and fight with your neighbors? The night after that board meeting, I barely slept. Every time I closed my eyes, I could still see their faces, pale, nervous, exposed in front of the very people they thought they controlled. For the first time, the board had been challenged openly, and for the first time, they looked weak. But weakness in people like them doesn't last long. Weakness turns into anger, and anger can be dangerous. The next morning, I stepped outside to pick up my newspaper. And there it was again, another notice stuck to my gate. This one said I was under investigation for community disruption. Community disruption? I almost laughed, because what I disrupted wasn't the community, it was their grip on power. I knew right then, this was war. And wars aren't won by defense alone. If I kept waiting for them to make moves, I'd always be reacting, always under pressure. I needed to change the game. I needed to go on the offensive. So I made a decision. I was going to rally the neighborhood. Not just a few people whispering in private, but all of us, together, standing as one. That weekend, I printed out flyers. Bold letters at the top, "Stand up for our homes." I walked door to door, handing them out, talking to people face to face. Some were hesitant, afraid of the board's retaliation. But more and more, I saw heads nodding, voices rising. They were tired of living in fear. By the end of the week, we had a group of more than 30 neighbors ready to meet again. This time, not in my backyard, but in the community park, right out in the open. The sun was setting when we gathered. Folding chairs circled up, kids running around, voices buzzing with nervous energy. I stood in the center and said, "This isn't just about my gate anymore. This is about every one of us. About the fines, the threats, the control. It's time we take our power back." Cheers broke out. For the first time, I saw hope in their eyes instead of fear. We made a plan that night. Every notice, every fine, every petty complaint, document it. Share it with the group. No more fighting alone. We would fight as one. But the most important part, we decided to push back legally. If they wanted to use the courts against us, fine. We would use the courts against them. A few neighbors pooled money together, and we hired a lawyer who specialized in HOA abuse cases. He was sharp, confident, and when he looked at the stack of documents I handed him, he smiled and said, "They're not going to like what I find." Days turned into weeks, and while the lawyer built our case, the board doubled their harassment. Patrol cars passed by my house 3, sometimes 4 times a day. They sent letters about my lawn being an inch too high, about a bird feeder hanging from my porch, about things so ridiculous, they didn't even sound real. But this time, I didn't feel fear. Every letter they sent me was another weapon I could use against them. Every petty notice was another piece of evidence to add to the mountain growing against their name. Still, the tension grew heavier every day. When I walked through the neighborhood, I could feel eyes on me. Some neighbors still avoided me, afraid of being caught in the crossfire. Others walked up, shook my hand, whispered, "Thank you." The lines were being drawn. One evening, I came home to find something I never expected. My gate, my proud, towering gate, had been spray painted. Ugly red letters across the iron bars, "Rule Breaker." I stood there in the fading light, staring at the words dripping down the metal. My stomach churned. It wasn't just about paper anymore. They had crossed a line. They had come onto my property. They had marked my home. I called the police that night, filed a report. The officer nodded, took notes, but I could tell, he didn't expect much to come of it. Whoever had done this probably thought they could scare me into silence. But all it did was fuel me more. The next day, I gathered the neighbors again. I showed them the photos of the vandalism. Gasps filled the air, and anger spread through the crowd. One man said, "If they can do this to you, they can do it to any of us." That was the moment the group turned from nervous to determined. We weren't just defending anymore. We were preparing to fight back harder than ever. Our lawyer filed a lawsuit against the HOA for harassment, abuse of power, and property damage. He said we had more than enough evidence to drag them through the mud. And when the news spread, people outside our community started to pay attention. Local reporters showed up, asking questions, wanting to hear the story. The board tried to silence it. They sent out letters calling us liars, troublemakers, trying to pit neighbors against each other. But the truth was too strong. And deep down, everyone knew what was happening. The day of the first court hearing, I stood outside the courthouse with a crowd of my neighbors at my side. We looked like an army, tired of being bullied, ready to fight. And as I looked around at the faces of the people standing with me, I realized, this wasn't just my battle anymore. This was our battle. This was about every homeowner who ever felt powerless. I walked through those courthouse doors with my head high. Whatever happened inside, I knew one thing for sure, we were done being afraid. But in the pit of my stomach, I also knew, desperate people do desperate things. If the board felt their control slipping through their fingers, what else would they try to hold on to it? And that's what keeps me wondering. If your HOA, or anyone in power, pushed you this far, would you fight back with everything you have, or would you walk away to keep the peace? The morning of the hearing, the air felt heavier than usual, almost like the sky itself knew something big was about to happen. I woke up before the alarm, sat at the edge of my bed, and stared out the window at my gate. Strong, tall, unshaken, it reminded me of why I started this fight in the first place. I poured myself a cup of coffee, but my hands were shaking so badly I nearly spilled it. This wasn't just nerves, this was the weight of knowing that whatever happened in that courtroom could change everything, not just for me, but for every family living under the shadow of the HOA. When I arrived at the courthouse, the parking lot was fuller than I expected. Cars lined the street, neighbors stepping out in groups, some holding folders, some just there to show support. The sight of them, standing with me, instead of hiding in silence, gave me courage I didn't know I still had left. Inside, the atmosphere was tense. The board members were already seated at the front, their lawyer whispering to them, flipping through binders. They looked polished, confident, but I saw the tightness around their mouths, the way their eyes darted to the growing crowd behind me. For once, they weren't in control. When the judge entered, the room fell silent. Papers shuffled, throats cleared, but all I could hear was the pounding of my own heart. The board's lawyer spoke first. He painted me as a troublemaker, someone who defied rules, someone who stirred up chaos in a peaceful community. His words dripped with arrogance, each sentence crafted to make me look like the villain. But when it was my turn, I stood, took a deep breath, and let the truth spill out. I told the judge about the letters, the fines, the constant harassment. I explained how my gate was built within their own rules, how they dragged me to court without cause, how they targeted me even after losing the first case. Then, I opened the thick binder I had carried in, filled with months of evidence. Photos of the vandalism on my gate. Copies of ridiculous violation notices. Statements from neighbors who had faced the same treatment. Page after page, I laid their abuse bare for everyone to see. The judge flipped through it, eyebrows rising. He turned to the board's lawyer. "Do you dispute this evidence?" The lawyer stammered, tried to dance around the question, but the truth was heavy, undeniable. And that's when something happened I'll never forget. One of the neighbors, an older woman who had been fined for the flowers in her yard, stood up from her seat in the gallery. Her voice shook, but it carried through the courtroom. "He's telling the truth. They've been bullying us for years. We're all tired of it." Then another voice rose. A man in the back. "They threatened to put a lien on my house for a broken mailbox. Enough is enough." One by one, people stood, speaking out. Their voices joined together, filling the room like a wave that couldn't be stopped. The board members looked terrified. Their perfect image was crumbling, right there, in front of the judge, in front of everyone. The judge banged the gavel to quiet the room, but I could see the shift in his eyes. He saw it now, this wasn't just one man with a gate. This was a community crying out for relief. When he spoke, his words were calm but sharp. "It is clear this board has overstepped its authority. This case is not about rules, it is about abuse of power. I am ordering an independent review of this HOA and its practices." Gasps filled the room. The board's lawyer turned pale. The president of the HOA gripped his chair so hard his knuckles turned white. As for me, I felt a weight lift off my chest. It wasn't a final victory, not yet, but it was the beginning of the end for them. After the hearing, we stepped outside into the sunlight. Neighbors surrounded me, shaking my hand, clapping me on the back. For the first time, I saw pride instead of fear in their faces. We had stood together, and it mattered. But even as we celebrated, I knew better than to think it was over. Power doesn't slip away quietly. When people like that feel cornered, they lash out harder. And sure enough, within days, the retaliation began. Anonymous letters in my mailbox, warning me to watch my back. Strange cars idling at the end of my street. A neighbor told me someone had knocked on their door in the middle of the night, telling them to stay out of it. The board was losing control, and they were desperate. One evening, as I locked my gate, I looked down the street and saw a figure watching me. Just standing there, half hidden in the shadows. The moment I stepped forward, they turned and disappeared into the dark. I couldn't shake the chill that ran through me. This wasn't about fines or notices anymore. This was personal. But here's the thing, fear only has power if you let it. And I was done being afraid. I doubled down. More neighbors joined our group. The lawyer pressed harder, digging deeper into the board's finances, their decisions, their shady dealings. Every day, we uncovered more dirt, and every day, their grip on the neighborhood slipped a little more. Still, as the pressure built, I found myself asking the same question late at night, staring at the gate that started it all. How far would they be willing to go to keep their power? And how far was I willing to go to take it away from them? So I ask you, if you stood face to face with people who abused their power, knowing they might stop at nothing, would you back down for safety, or would you keep pushing until justice was finally served? The night after I saw that figure standing at the end of my street, I barely slept. Every sound outside made me sit up in bed. Every car that passed by, every creak of the house, made my heart race. It felt like a storm was brewing, and I was standing in the middle of it. But when morning came, something inside me shifted. Fear was still there, but so was resolve. I looked out the window at my gate, shining in the early sun, and I whispered to myself, "They won't break me." I poured my coffee, sat at the table, and opened my folder of documents. Every page reminded me of what I had already survived: the letters, the fines, the vandalism, the court battle. I had come too far to turn back now. Later that day, the lawyer called. His voice carried a mix of excitement and seriousness. "We've uncovered something big," he said. "The board has been misusing HOA funds. Personal expenses charged to the community account, luxury dinners, even vacations." I almost dropped the phone. Misusing funds? That was the crack we had been waiting for. He explained that with enough signatures from homeowners, we could demand a full audit and even vote to remove the board. For the first time, victory wasn't just about defending my gate, it was about taking back the entire community. So we moved fast. That evening, I walked door to door with neighbors, gathering signatures. Some people were still scared, whispering about retaliation. But more and more, I saw courage replacing fear. "If we don't stand now," one man told me, "we never will." Within days, we had the numbers we needed. The board had no choice but to call a special meeting. And this time, it wasn't their show anymore. It was ours. The meeting hall was packed wall to wall. People stood in the aisles, their voices buzzing with anticipation. I sat near the front, folder in hand, heart pounding but steady. The board members shuffled in, their faces tight, their eyes scanning the crowd nervously. They knew. They could feel the ground slipping beneath them. When the meeting started, their president tried to speak with his usual authority, but the room no longer belonged to him. The lawyer presented the evidence, receipts, bank statements, proof of their misuse of funds. Gasps echoed through the hall. People shouted, demanded answers, demanded accountability. The board tried to deny it, tried to twist words, but it was useless. The evidence was too strong. The people were too loud. And then came the moment that still gives me chills. The lawyer turned to the crowd and said, "According to your bylaws, you have the power to remove this board, right here, right now, with a vote." The room erupted. People raised their hands, voices shouting yes. Yes. The energy was electric, unstoppable. When the final count was done, the board was gone. Removed. The hall shook with cheers. People hugged, clapped, cried tears of relief. For years, we had lived under fear, and in one night, we had taken our power back. I walked out into the cool night air, my neighbors around me, and for the first time in a long time, I felt free. The next morning, I stood at my gate. The spray paint was long gone, the iron bars gleamed again, and the street was quiet, peaceful. I placed my hand on the cold metal and smiled. That gate, once a symbol of defiance, had become something more. It was a reminder that ordinary people, when they stand together, can topple even the strongest walls of control. But even as I smiled, I couldn't forget the journey. The fear, the battles, the nights of doubt, they were all part of it. And they taught me something I'll never forget: power only lasts if we allow it. Weeks later, a new board was formed. This time, it was made up of real neighbors, people who cared about the community, not control. Meetings became fair. Notices became rare. And slowly, trust returned to the neighborhood. My gate still stands today, taller and stronger than ever. Every time I drive through it, I feel that same rush of pride. Not just because I built it with my own hands, but because it became a symbol of something bigger. Sometimes, when the sun sets and the street grows quiet, I sit on my porch and look at it. And I wonder, how different would things be if I had given in? If I had removed it, bowed my head, and stayed silent? I'll tell you this, silence is easy. But standing up changes everything. And that's why I share this story. Because somewhere out there, someone is facing their own fight with an HOA, with a boss, with anyone who abuses power. And maybe they need to hear this, you're not alone. You can win. So I'll leave you with this question, my friends. If someone tried to take away something you worked for, something you loved, and threatened everything you stood for, would you surrender for the sake of peace, or would you rise, fight, and build something even stronger in its place?